Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Director of Development for Student Success, Emily Lane.
So good evening and welcome to San Jose State's IR4, the Cognitive Era Talk series. I'd like to first thank our sponsors, Electronic Systems Design Alliance and Team Hogan, for making this evening possible. So my name is Emily Lane, and I am the Director of Development for Student Success Programs in the University Advancement. And for those of you who don't know, a University Advancement Division is dedicated to raising philanthropic resources to further the mission of the university. We partner with alumni, friends, and industry to promote academic excellence and diversity and provide spaces like this to engage in constructive conversation around what skills our graduates will need to be effective in the workforce of tomorrow. Thank you for coming and for your time and interest in the talk series in the evolving interdisciplinary study of cognitive science and data analytics. We are living in one of the most competitive professional environments in the country: faster computing systems, safer autonomous technologies, and the most secure cyber networks. Business applications in finance, manufacturing, healthcare, and other technologies need inbuilt intelligence to stay competitive in this smart application era. This means that we must trust technology to make important decisions for us, thus the rise of artificial intelligence. We have all heard the buzzwords and phrases: machine learning, deep learning, Internet of Things, and an increased demand for specialists in cognitive and data scientists. As a university, we are seeing a confluence of social and life sciences, business and engineering, and many other disciplines that are merging to form a new cognitive economy in Silicon Valley. San Jose State is honored to host this dynamic talk series. We invite you to participate and imagine with us what the future will look like as we dive into the fourth industrial revolution, the cognitive era. In an effort to make the talk more inclusive, please submit your questions via Twitter using hashtag SJSUIR4. And we will also have a Q&A at the end of the presentation where we will share all of your questions. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Evan Palmer, faculty member of SJSU's Department of Psychology and expert in the field of cognitive science. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. As she mentioned, my name is Dr. Evan Palmer, and I'm a faculty member in the departments of psychology and a member of the graduate program in research and experimental psychology and human factors and ergonomics engineering. I joined San Jose State last year, and as a cognitive scientist, there were a number of things that attracted me to San Jose State. Among those are the strength in our psychology department, and part of that, and a lot of that, is due to our connection to NASA Ames Research Center up the road. This is about a 30-year ongoing connection, and has really helped us to strengthen our graduate program in research and experimental psychology. I was also attracted to the Human Factors and Ergonomics Engineering program, which is really growing by leaps and bounds. It's one of only 2 accredited HFE programs on the West Coast. I want to point out a couple of other cognitive science-oriented programs that we have going. One is a minor in applied computing for the behavioral and social sciences. And so this is a great project. It's NSF supported, and what it does is it brings computer science training to people from the social sciences to help round out their education. Also, we have a human systems integration minor, and this is directly as a result from our work with NASA Ames. And this helps students like psychology students learn to think about real-world problems and apply what they've learned to domains like healthcare, computer science, and aviation. So I think what you can see is that there are a lot of efforts to sort of take the fuzzy side of social science and bring the techie side to it and bring those two things together. So one of the tasks I've been asked to do is to define cognitive science. And so here's my take. I think cognitive science is the study of intelligence and intelligent systems, carbon and silicon, from a number of different viewpoints. And some of the disciplines involved include, but are not limited to, philosophy, psychology, computer science, engineering, linguistics, and neuroscience. And my definition of cognitive science is probably colored by my education and background. I have a Bachelor of Science degree in cognitive science from UCLA. I stayed at UCLA, got a PhD in cognitive psychology with a minor in behavioral neuroscience. And then I did a postdoctoral fellowship at Harvard Medical School. And as a cognitive scientist, I've been involved in a number of different projects that I think show the breadth of the way you can apply this knowledge to different topics. So briefly, some of the projects include things like eye tracking people as they look at websites to figure out why they don't look at text advertisements, even though they're looking for text in other parts of the website. Studying doctors' mental representations of patient information for the purposes of handoff, so they can have a shared mental model with the other doctor and communicate the information effectively. I've done a lot of work looking at gamification and how it can be a form of motivational design to sort of make boring tasks more palatable. And finally, we've done some work optimizing air traffic control displays, adding perceptual cues to the icons to try to help controllers have a better 3D mental model of the airspace and maintain safe separation of aircraft. So this is a pretty broad, I think, set of projects. But the thing that's in common is that they all involve a perspective on cognitive science. So my definition of cognitive science is probably different than yours. And in particular, coming from psychology, I'm focusing mostly on the human. But notice that doesn't necessarily have to happen. There are lots of people who study AI and study it from a perspective of trying to solve a problem well, not necessarily solving a problem the way a human would. So many of you out there may have a business or computer science background, and you may see things differently than me about cognitive science, and I think that's great. One of the most important things is that it's interdisciplinary, and it's going to take lots of different viewpoints for us to be able to solve the problems we need to for the next century. So we're very excited to have Team Hogan here at San Jose State. We think this is a great opportunity to engage with industry about a shared vision for a future in cognitive sciences. I think it's really appropriate to have it here at San Jose State because we produce more of the Silicon Valley workforce than any other university. So without further ado, let me introduce Sean O'Kane. Sean is the MC for the series, and he's a native of San Jose, and he's currently employed at Cadence Design Systems as the Executive Director of Chip Planning Solutions, and he's also an executive producer and host of ChipEstimate.tv, a high-tech online show. And under his company Big Kahuna Productions, he serves as writer, director, and voice talent for corporate videos for Samsung, as well as voice talent in the video game industry for Sony, Nintendo, and Warner Brothers interactive entertainment video game divisions. So please join me in welcoming Sean.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Evan. And how's everyone doing tonight? Fantastic. And welcome to Jim Hogan's Fourth Industrial Revolution, the Cognitive Era Speaker Series. Tonight, our featured speaker is Vishal Kapoor with his topic, Preparing the Cognitive Era, Education, Occupation, and You. So, hidden among the 2.5 billion gigabytes of data generated each day are increasingly complex patterns to interpret, with smarter decisions to be made and innovative new discoveries to unlock. So we need systems that behave and interact with us more intelligently to decode this huge, immense data and all its forms, from pictures to videos posted on social media to real-time sensory information collected by satellites in space. So cognitive computing means, to me, is enabling machines to interact with humans in a more natural way. So the technology is key to drawing rational business conclusions from the right data so you can implement solutions with confidence. Now, say a doctor is treating you for a serious medical condition. Well, this cognitive data can help your doctor become experts in this in specific areas. So your doctor may not have the time to continuously absorb all this vast amount of information and changing a huge body of research. A cognitive assistant that physicians can question and interact with within seconds could speed up and streamline everyday tasks and decisions, saving time, money, and lives. Now, this series on cognitive computing help us unlock exciting possibilities and change the way we make decisions going forward and interact with people to solve the biggest challenges. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, how do I prepare for the future with, in my education and a chosen occupation? And so we're going to experience a lifetime of education, and we'll need to learn to adapt. And the job market will definitely change. And in many instances, we'll all need to be retrained in some way. Okay, so my degree is in radio, TV, broadcasting. However, because of limited possibilities or opportunities back then, I was given an opportunity to take what I learned and transfer that into high-tech sales and marketing. And that's what I did. However, being retrained or re-educated could very well be in the same field of study that you're very familiar with. So some might say, well, I'm focused on a degree in theology. Well, how does this cognitive era work for me? Well, what about cognitive science of religion? I went to school with a friend of mine at a Catholic school. It was a Catholic reform school. So, Our Lady of Ernest Borgnine. But anyway, I'm just kidding. We went to Catholic school together, and we were horrible. We'd get expelled for doing all the crazy stuff, with the nuns and the priests, and we thought we were going to end up in juvenile hall. So we're very rebellious, and I was now I'm just grateful that I'm here. And I think I've evolved a little bit. But now my friend is a professor of theology at Boston College, teaching the evolution and Christian ethics. Pretty interesting. So I asked him, tell me about this new era. He tells me that the cognitive science of religion will encompass many different methods and theories from a very broad range of disciplines, including cognitive psychology, like Evan, evolutionary psychology, cognitive anthropology, artificial intelligence, cognitive neuroscience, neurobiology, zoology, and ethology. So this is really widely and diverse. So people say, okay, well, what about virtual reality, VR? For all you computer gamers who sit in front of your console and compete for the status of being the best in Grand Theft Auto and World of Warcraft, well, virtual reality and cognitive computing will have become trends to watch in the tech industry in the coming years. You've probably seen it for gaming, entertainment, or education, but virtual reality is not just fun and games anymore. But did you know that VR computing helps you see the data in a whole new way? AI and VR technology applied in various industries like healthcare, finance, commerce, education, security, and of course, IoT, Internet of Things. And there's a deep, deep commitment to this technology and a very, very strong belief that the potential will benefit society and transform us personally and professionally. So, kind of finishing up here, being from San Jose State, I always knew that the university had a very, very strong nursing program. So let's talk about cognitive technology for nursing. The Valley Foundation School of Nursing here at San Jose State University is probably considered one of the elite schools of nursing. The U.S. Labor Department identifies the registered nurse as the top occupation in terms of job growth. And the rising cost of care and the increasing proportion of those costs being covered directly by consumers makes it more important for individuals to obtain the information needed to make better and informed lifestyle choices. Cognitive technology can help. People will be better patients if they know what's going on, what's going to be done to and for them. Okay? Health outcomes themselves are very easy to measure, but what's harder is to manage the behaviors, our behavior, like whether an individual is adhering to a particular treatment or protocol. So, thank you again for being here and joining us tonight. Cognitive computing will touch many different areas, so you're not going to be left out. There are some people that will be, and some jobs that will have to leave, and some will come in. Right now, I'd like to welcome to the stage our featured speaker. Vishal Kapoor is the founding principal at Three-Legged Stool, a boutique consulting firm that focuses on product market fit, channel strategies, and product launch. He works with a broad range of clients, from large corporations to startups. Three-Legged Stool works with organizations to drive all aspects of new business product creation, including business and marketing plans, target customer segmentation, product definition, pricing and packaging, brand, and market gap analysis. So, what Vishal is very, very passionate about is finding the core story and value behind the endeavors he works on and bringing that narrative to the market. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Vishal Kapoor.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, everyone. I want to start by thanking Dr. Palmer for sharing his perspective, for Sean for the kind introduction, and for SJSU for hosting us here today. So there's a lot of talk about the cognitive era. And about a year and a half back, just to give you a sense for why I'm here, about a year and a half back, Jim and I were sitting and talking about how we could look at the things that we're passionate about, bring some of our experience, and kind of put together a forum where we could have a dialogue about it, and not just from an investment perspective, but really from a perspective of how we could potentially give back. So we recruited John Montgomery, who I'll talk about a little bit later, and Chris Hill, and we formed this organization. It's a loose organization, and the idea is for us to work on topics like this. Let me tell you a little bit about myself. As Sean mentioned, I'm a part of a consulting firm. I started with my wife about 5 years back. We focus on the things that was deeply elucidated by Sean, but what we really do is our goal is to work with scientists and engineers and doctors and people who are really the idea and the focus people in terms of where those ideas germinate and what they can make out of them. But as we tell our clients, as we tell our kids, that people don't buy technologies, people don't buy science, they buy products. So the role that we play is that as they're in this realm where they're thinking about the ideas and how to take them to market, that's where we come and participate. Okay. Just by a show of hands, how many of you were here when Jim gave his talk a couple of weeks back? It's about half of the people in the room. For the rest of them and the people online, I'm just going to take about a couple of minutes and share with you what brought us here. So in 2016, Klaus, at the World Economic Forum, he talked about the cognitive era. And the description of the cognitive era was really interesting because it encapsulated the fact that we've moved from an era where everything was mechanical, and it led to the boom of the agricultural era, took it to the next level. Then we had the electrical era, and you had the ability to move from things that were human-powered in the mechanical sense to become electrically powered. I think we all understand that 100 years later, we were in the electronic realm, and I think everybody understands that well. But what's really interesting about the cognitive era, at least for me, when I started looking at it deeply, it was how we're already in this era and we're catching up to understand what it means. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this and bring it to where Jim left us last time. So he talked about the fact that this is the integration of the physical, the biological with the digital. And while there are many stories out there, there are people around who believe that today we've got bots and robots helping us, and tomorrow, I can't imagine it, but become our companions and then become people who control us. I'm kind of here to tell you that maybe it's not that bleak. Maybe there's another perspective to look at this. And that perspective maybe starts by understanding what cognition means. To me, I have this habit of trying to go to the dictionary and see, well, I'm going to go into this realm. Do I even understand the definition? And this idea of acquiring information or knowledge and then analyzing it in such a way that you can take some action with it. That's all cognition is about. We as humans have that ability. And if you bring it into this industrial revolution, the fourth one, or the cognitive era, what you have is the opportunity to now sense your environment, analyze what's happening, and then act on it. So what I'm going to do is kind of break this talk up into three realms. First, just talk a little bit about some of the awareness that we could all have. Certainly this was a part of my own awareness. Then get a little bit of understanding of what we can do with that, and finally encourage you to take action. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the physical and the biological. And the physical and the biological today is being sensed and analyzed. And there are some obvious ways that it's being done. If you look at a car, between the last 2 decades and today, you've got an order of magnitude more sensors. And I'll draw your attention to a couple of sensors that I thought were very interesting. Even though I've done work in the automotive space, I didn't know ahead of that there's a drowsiness sensor. Or as my kids know, my favorite sensor, the one that helps you park when you can't really back into a space. But it goes beyond that, right? Today, not just your kitchen, but your entire home is being sensed and analyzed. So while you have the ability to take out your smartphone and put in the temperature you want so that your Nest or your thermostat gives you the right temperature, that device also knows when you're in the house and when you're not. Just something to think about. The first time I realized that, when it knew that I was away, I was like, wow, that's a little creepy. But then it gets to the next level, and there's something called a realm of synthetic sensors. So there's a sensor that's been created at Carnegie Mellon University. And this sensor is just a little thing that sits on your wall, but it's listening to you. It can figure out at the first order what the different sounds in your home are. In the second order, it starts to synthesize those sounds, and it can say, well, I just heard this tap running. Oh, wait, it's still running. Oh, wait, the sound is a little different. It's not draining. And it has enough cognitive ability, and yes, I did say cognitive ability, even though it's basic, to be able to tell you that you're going to have an overflow situation. And given that I've had an overflow situation in my house, I really wish that one of these sensors was around when our house almost flooded just because of a leak. But it moved from that physical and your environment, right, to yourself, to the biological. So we all know that there are sensors on our bodies, but it is pretty amazing that just in the last 5 to 7 years, not only can you measure your own blood sugar, but you can provide insulin today at the rate that your body needs, right? It's in trials. I know it's not fully FDA approved, but this capability exists. About a month back, I was watching this keynote. Some of you might recognize this. And this keynote was talking about atrial fibrillation and the amount of people who are affected by it and how it goes undiagnosed. And of course, this was the keynote from Apple, right? So here's a company that's known for consumer products. Some might argue frivolous, some might argue pretty, certainly technologically advanced. But what was alarming to know is that the most proliferated heart monitor in the world is an Apple Watch. So you start to think that just 10 years back, when you thought you had a heart problem, you had to go to your primary care physician. Then you had to wait a month and a half, maybe 3 months to get an appointment. Today, through the Apple Heart study that Apple is doing with Stanford, they're working towards a realm where they'll be able to diagnose some of these things on a daily basis. And having worked with a colleague just in his 30s who had to deal with this, and it took him an entire week to figure out the level of problem he had, which if there was a sensor there, he would have just known, is pretty amazing. And this thing that is sensing you and your environment, it knows the temperature around you, it knows your body temperature, it knows your heart rate. This is just a little thing that there is no prick, there is nothing, right? It is just sensing through light-emitting diodes what's happening. Now, leave the technical side of it, but just pause to think about the fact that we've reached this level of capability where we can sense what's happening in ourselves and our environment. But what's happening with all these sensors, right? We talked about the physical world, the biological world, but all this information that's being sensed, it's being gathered. And it's being gathered into the digital realm. And there are people who are already acting on this information. And these people who are acting on the information are in the digital realm, Because what they're doing is they're capturing your behavior. And once they capture your behavior, they form a persona of who you are. Because now they've captured your behavior, so they know what you're like. And it isn't as beautiful as it looks like here. It isn't John or Mary's perspective, but they're approximating who you are. And they're approximating who you are, and this is not something that's coming. This is something that's been happening over the last 5-7 years. And they're monetizing it. So today, the corporations out there, these are only 2 of the top 5 largest firms in the world, and the top 1 isn't even included in here. And there's about $500 billion of revenue that's generated by just your behavior, and not yours or yours specifically, but some approximation of who you are. $500 billion. So the cognitive era is here, and it is being monetized. But it's not being monetized by us. It's our information, we the people. It's not about that. Let me take you back to the 70s, right? You had this revolution, and people were talking about, you know, what you need in a society is free healthcare, free education, or at least affordable. And you need a system where the government is taken out, and people have the ability to form their own future, right? The open market. And we're sitting here today where you have the corporations who are monetizing your information without your permission, or actually it is with your permission, but you know that thing you quickly accept when you go onto a website or the app you download, you're giving them access to your information. This last year has been interesting for me. Like most of us, I've always thought of Albert Einstein as this amazing scientist and physicist. And what I've started to learn is how much of a philosopher maybe, and at least a socially aware person he was. So if you think that maybe it was the 50s that this statement was made, with every generation, such a statement is made, and when that statement is made, you have to see that, is it getting to a point where we can't catch up, or can we actually catch up with it? So when we have this awareness and understanding, what can we do with it? We are in an educational institution, so let's talk about that a little bit. We think of the cognitive era and its foundation being computer science. So when you think about literacy, something to think about is, as we get into the era of computer science, is literacy being redefined to include coding? Now, if you think about that, what literacy allowed you to do is when you could read or write something, it gave you the opportunity to participate in the economy, in the social dialogue. If a lot of that in our future is going to be automated, it's going to be tied to software and hardware, then should we start to understand that? I certainly have a computer science degree, so I might be a little biased, but something for us to think about, because there are people in the audience who are not from the computer science realm, and I certainly have this conversation with my children as well. It's something that I believe is becoming an imperative. And as we become computer scientists, what we have to keep in mind is that computer science and coding is just a form of implementation. Cognitive science is much broader, right? What it does, Evan talked about it a little bit. What it is if you look at that bottom part which talks about artificial intelligence, it brings so many other human aspects, linguistics, psychology, philosophy, and understanding how the human brain works. If you just get on TED right now, or maybe after the talk, right, and if you take a few minutes, you'll see there is so much work done in the realm of neuroscience, and that work has been distilled by people for us where we can actually take advantage of it. So one of the things I talked about was that computer science is something that is today about implementation, right? You take ideas and you can code them and you can implement an idea. And it brought me to think about the difference between architecture and engineering, and why, as Evan was talking about earlier, as I'll talk about a little bit more depth, is why we need a broader perspective and one beyond just our core perspective, which might be either computer science or broadly just anything other than computer science. And what I mean by that is, if you think about the left brain, what the left brain is really good at is being precise, radical, and helping you build systems, right? So again, implementation, building something that the right brain thought of, something that was artistic or creative, or something that took a theory or a thesis and built around it. And this is something that I certainly was fortunate enough to be exposed to earlier in my career, and getting to a level where, let me bring in the realm of computer science and how I think about it, right? A data engineer understands programming, understands implementation, understands database. And then we have this term called a data scientist. And what I found really interesting here was that if you start to look at things that move outside of just that math into storytelling or modeling, right? What is modeling? Where you're taking an approximate view of something and then working towards the details, not the other way around. You're not building it bottom up, you're building it top down. Visualization, how do you think of data? Sean talked about the fact that you can visualize all this data. Well, being able to actually think through that is an important thing. And I think that, to me, this was a very telling perspective. And this comes out of Udacity. It's an online, very credible online platform, and they talk about it in this way. And as I was looking at this, I started to think about the fact that there are so many complementary programs that are being offered by universities which tie what you know, maybe what was even your passion, and tie it to this digital era and marry those together to have greater success in that area. And success not just defined by financial success, but one where you can provide a lot of value back to the community you're participating in. There are educators in this audience, there are students in this audience, and I remember when I was younger, there was this whole thought of your education should be deep and you should know everything about it. And then I started in grad school, so it was a bit late for me, but in grad school I started hearing this concept of a T-shaped education. Try to have a broad understanding of the trends and the things that are happening in the world around you. And as you get that understanding, try to go deep in one discipline. So in this case, whether it was linguistics or lab science or whatever it might be, but then have another which is an understanding of how do you take that knowledge, that right brain aspect of what you have, and understand a system in which you could implement it. Because if you cannot implement it, then it's just an idea. And if you only have implementers, then where are the ideas going to come in from, right? I mean, there's a lot of talk about how computer scientists are building things today that we found in in sci-fi. And this is not a big surprise, because as they did more and more studies, they found those of us who really, really enjoyed science also happen to like Star Trek. And so that's where some of our ideas are coming from. And I'm sure there's a lot of other shows, which I don't know about. But still, getting to this T-shaped education, and not just education through school. We're at a time where things are very different than the previous eras that we had, right? Prior to the moon landing, we lived in what were intergenerational eras, right? So you were born, and your parents and your grandparents and your siblings were living in an era where you knew these are the jobs, these are the kinds of education paths that you could take to have those jobs. And those jobs are going to be there for tens and hundreds of years, but certainly in your lifetime. So I remember the conversation back in India with my parents. Are you going to be a doctor or an engineer? It's like, wow, I didn't know there are only two occupations in the world. And it was really interesting, because while it was easy for me to pick engineering, and I decided to be an engineer when I was 10. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe I thought, well, you could just break apart stuff and put it together. That's more interesting than being in medicine. But I was 25 when I knew I didn't. And that's something that we have to keep in mind, because as we get into this era now today, where it is an intergenerational era, right? It is an era where, and I apologize for the small size there, but between the web being created and the genome being sequenced, and the iPhone coming out. You could have a child born, and that child wouldn't even be in high school, right? So if you think about that, there are things happening in an intergenerational era, which means that our foundational education could be best served by trying to understand multiple skills so that we at least don't get one-tracked, and we have the ability in the future to get, I don't like the word retrained, it feels very animal at a zoo, but the opportunity to learn new things, find new passions. And that's really important because what is unprecedented today is the ability that you have, the resources that you have to be able to follow these new passions. Now, a part of that ability certainly comes from the fact that computing has gotten to a level where when I was in college and my minor was artificial intelligence, we read a lot of papers. We had these languages called Lisp, and we coded in them, but that was pretty much it. We were moving things around lists, and that was it. And they said, yes, someday this will become AI. Today, the computational power we have gets us there. Think about this. In almost a little over 5 years, computing will have the ability to surpass brain power. Now, I like the caveat of brain power because it doesn't talk about brain context or brain thinking or brain imagination. So I'm certainly not one of those people who fears that by 2023, all I have to do is go sit somewhere because I'm not going to be relevant. But keep in mind that these are elements that we want to be aware of and understand them and leverage them. Okay, so we've talked about corporations, we've talked about education. I think in literacy, something that I certainly didn't have a lot of exposure when I was a student was cultural literacy. And cultural literacy is something which, if we don't have, then we've got artificial intelligence sensing our environment. But we become ambivalent or ignore our environment. And that's something that I think is really important because just look at this statistic. 20 people in the US have half the wealth. The 8 richest people in the world have the same amount of wealth as half of the world. Financial literacy. Understand that we are living in a very diverse world. I was talking to Evan about this earlier, and we were talking about echo chambers, right? Not only are we living in isolated worlds, we're getting information from only those worlds. So our perspective is just becoming a perspective that we're just reinforcing. So we live in the valley and we think, autonomous cars, what's the big deal? Well, it is a big deal, right? It is a big deal to a lot of people who don't even have the money to put gas in their gas car. And here we're talking about things that are at another realm. The time that this became real for me was when I started hearing about Occupy Wall Street, right? We're at this point where there is divergence happening at a cultural level, right? That if we don't become aware, whether we're on the right side of it or on the side that suffers, when there comes to be a revolution of some sort, and I don't mean to talk about a revolution like the Roman Empire going down or anything of the sort, but these revolutions usually find a counterbalance, and that counterbalance is our opportunity. 1984, 37% of computer science graduates were women. 2017, it's about half. So while we're sitting here in the most modern of eras, we're talking about a discrepancy in education between genders and a discrepancy in pay gaps. Of course, the financial aspect still always wins. But to understand that discrepancy and to see that when it gets to money, when it gets to finance, then none of those other cultural elements are viewed, right? Because if you have it in that realm, then the other realm is not viewed. I was looking at the Forbes 400, And I started to think, so there is this financial divide, there's a gender divide, and then there is a cultural divide which at best, at simplest, could be defined around ethnicities. But it was amazing to me that even though the Forbes 400 admittedly does have Oprah Winfrey in it, but still, right, the representation of that wealth of 400 people and two ethnicities that are highly disadvantaged is something that we don't think of. We don't spend time on that, and because we don't have the awareness. And then what's happened in the last 5 years, maybe it's 7 now, it's the first time in US history, or at least in a long time, maybe at least in the last 50, 60 years, where the wealth has started moving from the poor to the rich. And this is different from the wealth moving in a direction where everybody's growing and maybe the poor don't grow as much as the rich. But when the median income falls, and not only does it fall, it falls in a way where at an average it's fallen, but it hasn't fallen for everyone. That's something for us to be aware of. And finally, when you bring it to education, this was an amazing statistic to me, but when I looked at it and I thought about it, it makes sense. I grew up in India, and the only thing we were told when we were kids is all you need is an education. And then you can get out of the strata that you're in and get to a different one. To me, these elements of cultural awareness are really important because if we ignore them, then we're ignoring that environment around us. So Klaus Schwab, who I talked about earlier, he says that there's never been a time of greater promise or peril. Awareness and understanding, and particularly awareness at its first order, makes us uncomfortable, right? Because it is something we didn't know. And there's probably a little bit of discomfort in this room. I've had about a month to think about it, so my discomfort has been an era where I'm starting to think about what can I do about this. I'm certainly an optimist, and I believe that this is a time of great promise. I'm also a believer that in each one of these eras, somebody said, the kids don't understand, the jobs are going to go away, and they didn't. And I believe a part of that was not because left to their own path, those things might not have happened. What I believe has happened is that there is a counterbalance that comes up with this awareness. There are people who start to look at these things and bring them into a realm of opportunity where you're not looking at a capitalist society or a communist society. You're looking at a society, you're judging a society by its ability to ensure that as a society we survive, not only certain elements of the society. I talked about corporations and I talked about their evil angle, if you will. But just about a year and a half back, I started looking at benefit corporations. Just take a moment so that I'm not just repeating what you can read here, but look at the fact that this is a corporation. Its entire idea is for all people, whether it is at different ranks, so think about hierarchy as financial hierarchy, or about providing community service, or about giving women more opportunity. These are foundational elements of these corporations. And as we were looking at forming Team Hogan, John Montgomery, we were very pleased to have him as a part of our team because he's one of the authors of this benefit corporation. Because you want to take the systems that are available and use those systems to make the changes. Take a moment to look at some of the benefit corporations. Again, when you go back and you're thinking through this, go and research this and see that there are people who are absolutely focused on taking this unprecedented technology and access to that technology and doing real good with it. We started talking about, in the beginning, about the cyber-physical. And let me bring it back to a very distinct view in my mind of what machines can do and what humans can do. And we talked about it a lot, and I want to conclude by bringing it back to education. as you bring it back to education, there's a lot of talk about this thing called computer science plus X, right? Get a computer science degree and then do a little philanthropy on the side, do a little humanities on the side. And I think that while that's a noble start, Evan and I had a chance to talk about this a little bit. To me, it's more about X and CS. Think about the realms that you are passionate about, that you can make a difference in, and then use that element of literacy, use that element that is a system founding block, and take your passion and apply these principles to it. So let me conclude by talking about the fact that the way we can all look at the cognitive era is to have awareness around it, to get a better understanding, not just of ourselves, but of people who are not ourselves. And what I mean by that is reach out across whatever boundary you can, because the richness that you get when you do that is really not just rewarding, but it's enriching. And then finally, just like any good late evening conversation, you say this was a fantastic conversation, and then you go to sleep, and you do the same thing in the morning. And I invite you to act. There are, and like I said, an unprecedented amount of resources available. If anybody in the audience online, if you want to reach out to me, I'm happy to share some of the learnings that I've been fortunate enough to have. I couldn't end without Einstein again. It's pretty amazing after you go through a significant part of your education and become a fanboy about a person in a completely different light. And I think that this is really important for the few of who in the audience who know me. You know that one of the questions I always want to know when we're engaged is, what does success look like for you? And I found that I want to change that a little bit to say, in that success, are you encapsulating value that you could provide to your constituents? And your constituents are your community. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, Vishal Kapoor right here. Thank you, Vishal. So we're going to bring on the other big kahuna, Mr. Jim Hogan. We're going to go through a little Q&A here. And for those of you who have questions, we have a microphone in the back. Don't shout it out in the audience because we want to hear you. We encourage you to just line up back there if you have a question. And I think that's it. Sure. I do have one from Twitter from Charles Delicio. Okay, and he shared a couple of things last month as well. But this is very good. Is social media, Facebook, building echo chambers versus generating creative confrontation? Now, Jim and I just briefly talked about that backstage. How do you want to?
Why don't I start?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. You know, I think everybody understands the concept of echo chambers. If you spend any time on Facebook at all, you know, you got your 300 friends, 400 friends, and everybody starts agreeing on everything. So you never hear any, you know, contrarian point of views. So I think, I'll give you my personal view on things, right? I think when you collaborate with people, it's always good to have a contrarian point of views because it builds a stronger whole. You know, you build a hybrid that's stronger than something that's homogeneous. And so, you know, unfortunately, I think the way Facebook is, in particular, it's very hard to get that collaboration from people that don't share your opinion. So what the Charles was talking about, is there a way to do that constructively and, you know, allow other opinions to come into a conversation? So I can tell you how I do it personally. I mean, I reach out and try to find people that don't necessarily agree with me very often, or people that don't necessarily have publicly not shared my views, and I try to connect with them because I want those. I want that contrarian point of view definitely to me. Now, it turns out that I'm right most of the time, but you know, it's really well, you know, a good portion of the time, but you know, but it really does build a stronger whole if you can achieve that. So yeah, I don't have the answer for Facebook yet, but I'm sure, it's important to have the discussion like we are tonight.
Well, let me share a contrarian perspective.
There you go.
That platform, and it is a cognitive platform, as long as its revenue comes from figuring out a approximation of who you are and your friends are, and using that to generate ads, I'm sorry, everything else, that's the mighty dollar. And till that happens now, with the election, it's the first time that company has been challenged and Google's been challenged, right? So the two biggest companies.
Well, you remember Zuckerberg said, no, the Russians weren't messing with us, at first.
Sure.
Right?
But I think that one of the things that happens in the cognitive era is that you're also getting a level of transparency that you haven't had before. And because of that, these things that are happening will come to light, and therein lies the opportunity. So it's going to be we, the people, who are going to force the corporations to change. But till the mighty dollar is there, driving force, I don't believe.
You're right, especially on Facebook, and it's all about clicks and the money. And I'd like to be the guy that puts up all the kitty videos because
he's knocking.
I would be retired.
Well, that was the thing with Google at first, right? One of the first business models with Google had nothing to do with advertising. Those guys realized if they allowed advertising, it would subjugate. It would, diminish the capability of the search, right? The searches are all manipulated now. Honestly, I might have had my opportunity once or twice to kind of get myself on the front page, or one of my companies more precisely. And I work really hard at getting my company on the first page of the search. And if you can manipulate that, it's not necessarily good for things that we got to worry about in a republic, right? So the republic has a threat. See, we fix it, or somebody else fixes it.
How many students do we have out here tonight?
Great.
This is for Vishal. So what is the one thing that these students should learn or take away from their education? What specific to this area?
Yeah, let's hear that.
No pressure at all.
Pay your student loans off.
This is no. I'm actually serious about this because I have this conversation in our home with my children. If there is one thing that I wish I was told when I was going to school, if you could have just one thing from education, I would say recognize that mentors are the ones who will be the best guides. And mentor is not someone who shows up every 6 months and makes you feel like you should be grateful because he or she gave them the time, but someone who has a vested interest in your success, right? To me, that is the single important thing that I would tell people to take out of education.
Yeah, well, can I build on that one for
Please,
a second?
sir.
Yeah, so being the oldest guy on the stage, maybe in the room as well, I get this mentor thing every once in a while. So I'm nobody's mentor. I'm their tormentor. The whole deal is to push them outside their comfort zone, right? Because people sit in their comfort zone and they don't move. So students, yeah, you want somebody that pushes you beyond what you think you're capable of. We were just talking about it. I'll use the Cadence example, right? So years ago, Cadence is a public company. We've all worked there, and I was running engineering. I was doing okay. I had a beard and I had my ponytail. I was the coolest engineering guy there ever was. And Jim Solomon comes up to me, who founder of the company, and says, "Let's have lunch." So we talk about, he gets there about 40 minutes late. And then we're talking about his divorce and his new girlfriend, and he has to move out, and it's going all over the place. And then some of you guys may remember Charlie Janik says, "I'm going to go to Europe and be a sales guy." And I go, "Oh man, what are we going to do about marketing?" Right? And Jim turns to me and says, "Oh, you're the marketing guy, right?" And you know what? You gotta cut your hair, get rid of the beard, and start wearing suits.
You adapted.
Well, with $3,000 out of his pocket, I did. and came back in with 5 suits, the following Monday, right? So the point is they thought I could do something that I never envisioned I could do. And yeah, well, we could argue I made a few mistakes. But Cade's still doing okay. Yeah, not because of me anymore, but at least I left it with somebody that didn't die. And so what I would say is a mentor pushes you beyond your comfort zone. How's that? One last thing. School is great. It teaches you how to learn, how to adapt, right? Because the actual content of what they teach you, you may or may never use. There's a lot of stuff in the math department that I was taught that I'm never going to use. But the point is, I figured out how to do the algorithms and learned where I could find backup information, things like that, and adapt. That's the most important thing school teaches you. And then, with the help of mentors and people around you, when an opportunity is presented to you, you probably should take it, because the thing that's going to save everybody is your experience and wisdom and your ability to synthesize things.
We have a question back here. Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Mike Wardley. I'm a director across in IT at the university. I have a couple of comments. The first one is I did my computing science degree a long time ago, 84, 85. And you're right. I was surrounded by probably half the class was female. And where the hell did they all go?
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing.
Yeah.
I mean, I worked with, always with my whole career with mixed groups, and it seems to be swinging massively towards the boys. I don't understand why. It just makes no sense to me. My comment and what I want to ask you was, I liked the approach you're taking. I don't see corporations as the great evil. I've worked at a corporation my whole career. I was 25 years at HP and 5 years at Cisco, now the university. But I see a fundamental problem with, I think one of your co-workers said, the republic. Corporations have more rights than me. They have more money than me, which means they have more influence than me. And that's a huge problem. If we don't fix it, there will be no republic.
Yeah, there's sorry, continue, please.
No, that's it. I mean, and it frustrates me. I'm foreign. You can tell my funny accent.
I thought you were from New Jersey.
People have said that before. But I think the US has this most wonderful constitution and republic.
Yeah.
I think only foreigners can really appreciate it, because we go, oh, it's where we're from. It's not quite so good. We've got this guy with an axe and he's called the king. But when we come here and we become zealots, I think I probably am, we go, God, you need to protect this. These corporations will lay it asunder. And it's not that they're bad, it's just they're alive.
Yeah.
And because they're alive, they don't reproduce the way we do, but they're definitely alive.
They are.
And you look at the politics now, it's massively influenced, not necessarily for the good. I mean, it's a comment I would encourage you to.
Let's look at history, right?
Yeah.
So let's go back 100 years. Theodore Roosevelt, Sherman Antitrust, right? Started breaking up monopolies because he felt, and his people felt, they had too much control. J.P. Morgan in particular. And he broke up as best he could through legislation the monopolies, right? So today we have some pretty powerful companies that are capable of operating outside the United States and have their own culture and rules. So to preserve, now I see James standing up there and he's a little right of me, so we'll hear what the question is here in a second. But I think we may have a problem. It may be too hard for the current government to deal with, right? How do we deal with these 5 or 6 companies that control so much of the cyberspace, right? In the last century, it was the energy companies. Today, it's the information companies. History repeats itself. Yeah, I think I agree with you. I want to preserve the republic. So we got to fix these things. So actually, I'll give you my ray of hope here, is that I think, it's a good possibility that we'll have direct democracy with things like blockchain to ensure that there's no tampering with votes and things. I don't think that's too far out. Other countries are already doing those sort of things. So maybe cognitive era results in more democracy. Just a question. Sorry, I monopolized
I
that.
know I don't think that corporations are evil. I think the fallacy we have is that we assign them terms that are human terms. You can't expect loyalty from a corporation. It's not human. So while it is alive in a sense that you talked about, the two things I keep in mind is don't expect loyalty, which is a human emotion, from a non-human entity. And the other is, it's not so much about being evil, but it's human nature. The humans in those companies that are driving, you've heard of the fact that, power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. If you give someone complete power, then they start seeing just that singular vision. And in that vision, they know that to get to that vision, the more money they have, the further they'll get. So maybe it's not about good and evil. It's again about awareness of what they are. And if you want to preserve the republic in any form, right, then the republic has to rise.
Jim.
You didn't answer the boy-girl question.
Oh, boy-girl question. Yeah, there's that, honestly, I was listening to an NPR thing about this today or yesterday, and it's the biology. And I mean, I don't mean by that the ability of women not to participate intellectually or physically in whatever the hell we're doing. It's the child rearing. They got to take so much time out of their careers at the critical point of their career to go raise a family. That's a tough decision to make, right? Because it's so hard to re-enter. In fact, it came up in an interview. I was interviewing a woman, pardon me, and she's 50 years old and for a job. And she'd been out of the workforce for, like 14 years as raising a family. And she says, look, I can do this. And I said, yeah, I know you can do it. And she says, I'm not starting where everybody else is starting at 50. I'm starting where I was at 35. So it's really, I don't know the answer, but I think I understand one of the contributing factors to this. I'll give you one more example. And I got to sort of shelter the names. So I got a friend that's COO at a big law firm. And, he's mandated to hire a bunch of women and put them on the partner track. And so everybody gets about 35 or so. They got to consider having a family or not. And so they'll leave the partnership track to go have their family. So he says, why am I hiring women if they're just going to leave? This isn't me talking. This is somebody else talking, right? And so that attitude is out there, right? What do we do about it? So, social science people, I'm not equipped to deal with that one. I recognize the problem. I have empathy for the position. What do we do about it? Don't know.
Well, so I'd like to talk about this. I think I'm glad that you brought that up. I know that from the 1990s when there were 37% women to now, their biology hasn't changed. So I just want to bring that to the front because I think that whether it is financial divide or gender divide or ethnic divide, the people in power, what happens is they don't see the other side. And I'm sad that I don't have an answer to your question, but that to me is the root of the issue.
Yeah. I mean, go back to affirmative action, right? There's a middle class that's been developed in, let's call it, ethnic minorities that wasn't there when I was a kid. So was affirmative action something that helped bridge a generation to where we are today? Yeah. So there is something government can do about it. I don't know if they will do something about it.
We got about 5 minutes
left. Sorry,
That's
folks.
all right. Jim?
We've already left the point that I wanted to comment on from the last speaker, and I think it might be helpful to think about the 5 monopolies, the Cognitive Era,
Yep.
the Sherman Act, and what does all that mean in the context of the comments from the last commentator. I don't think that we want to curtail our speech and First Amendment rights because of the problem that exists as a consequence of the 5 big monopolies. Those problems can be dealt with the Sherman Act. When I think of corporations, I think of small businesses, startups. These are the things that are, small businesses and startups are going to benefit in the cognitive era. They need to have the freedoms and the protections of our Constitution so they can thrive. The inequities that are a consequence of the monopolies that exist today with the 5 big monopolies can be dealt with if there is a willingness to use the Sherman Act the way that it's been used historically against AT&T and other monopolies.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we should rush to curtail our First Amendment rights because of the problems that exist with these 5 monopolies in particular. They'll be dealt with if there's a political will,
If there's political will,
and people understand the nature of the inequities that they've created. They've given us all enormous benefits, but they're going to have to be dealt with because they have become monopolies with perhaps the kind of power and influence that at this point is no longer tolerable.
Yeah, thanks, James.
Hi. I was wondering with the graph on brain power versus machine power, and it looks like it's very close that we're going to have companion machines smarter than us.
Yeah.
Are we all going to have those, do you think, or just a few big companies will have them? And if everybody has them, does the world that you want suddenly appear, do you think?
So I think there are 2 things. One, certainly I would not go up against Ray Kurzweil and say that he's wrong, but my belief is that it's very well caveated in the fact that it'll have the computing power of the human brain, and as I was saying, I don't believe it'll have the smarts, so it's not starting to replace us. I also believe, like just like any adoption curve, we're probably going to see 5, 7, 10 years where very limited few people will have that access. But yeah, that's probably the extent to which.
Yeah, I mean, you know, sentinel beatings are right around the corner according to Kurzweil, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think he said 2032 for a long time. Probably going to happen. Now, how they think is another thing, and how they're aware of themselves is another thing. Are people going to have access to them? Sure. I mean, like in so many ways we already do. I mean, you can go to Amazon Cloud and dial up how much memory you want and how many CPUs you want. Not just how many CPUs, but which CPUs you want. So that's within grasp in the next couple of years. Now, what do we do with that? Well, I think it gives us an opportunity to really go off and explore some space that we couldn't necessarily do as humans. I think so. It's an augmented future, I believe, in the time I'm going to be on the planet, for the remaining time I'm here. After I leave, you guys can do whatever you want.
Hi. So my question is a little bit of 2 parts.
Uh-oh.
As
Compound question.
compound question, so compound answer, hopefully. So the first part is, I'm a millennial, and I'm part of this
I'm
generation raised on these things that are basically using our brains, and they're developing these adwares that are so specific that they know what decisions we're going to make like 5 years in the future before we ever even think about making them.
Yeah.
And so as a millennial, how can I become more self-aware and help others to become more self-aware about that? So that's the first part of the question. And as it's played out in the political scheme, how can we cognitively become more available to contrary opinions and more open to contrary opinions? Because it's so politically divided right now.
Yeah.
I don't know how we're going to fix this besides being open.
First one, maybe. Hey, well, so put some tape over your camera.
Okay.
Now start with that.
I did that already.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, be paranoid, fear everything. Definitely. Lisa and I got in a fight the other day because I was watching. Now it's getting personal. It's because there was this entrapment thing for DeLorean that I was watching. I was all pissed about it because government shouldn't be entrapping its citizens. Blah blah blah. So you just got to find truth, man. And there's so much crap out there, and some of it's just fake news and not real. But you got to search out the truth, and that means using more than one resource. That means using more than just whatever Facebook feeds up to you, right? You know, that's your responsibility as a good citizen in a democracy or a republic. You got to do that, right? And it's hard to do. It's a lot easier just to accept what they hand you, right? But you can't. So that sounds pretty conspiratorial, huh? Yeah? Sure. Okay, go.
You asked the question, you're here, so you're already aware, right? So the first thing you need to do is make more of your peers aware. The second one is trickier because when you're in an echo chamber, right, you can't hear outside. So what I and our family has been seeking is where we get our news from. So I'll just give you a very simple thing. If you use Google News, today you have the ability to now go in, and when you go into personalization, you can actually amplify the contrarian opinion even over the one that you buy into. And again, that exposes you to those things. So first, when you get that exposure and awareness, you'll easily get to the understanding and the action. And like I said, you're here.
Definitely,
So you already stepped in the right direction.
Thank you, guys.
You know, like on that one, I'm getting the hook. So, you know, it's true. Like you'd be surprised. You know, Google buys feeds from every news agency there is, right? So to your point, you know, I mean, you know, you probably want some BBC news because they're a little more balanced in worldviews and the American media.
Plus they have the accent.
Plus they have the accent, so that makes them a lot smarter, you know. And so, anyway, the most important thing we got to do here, Sean, I think, is deal with that box.
The drawing, yes. Everyone has their ticket. And I'm going to ask your son, the violinist.
The violinist, the young prodigy.
Just pick out
Pick
the
my
ticket
number.
that
Pick
has
mine.
my name on it. That's right. I'm kidding.
Your job is done. Thank you.
This is the winning ticket for a Rombauer Zinfandel.
Napa Zinfandel.
Napa.
You know they're not going to have that for a few more years. So
That's right.
sorry.
Easy.
That was a little insensitive. I admit it.
It's the blue ticket. Anyway, thank you. 491058.
Well,
The winner.
hey, man. Great. Love it when one of my guys wins. Awesome. Come on up. Where are you going to serve this in our meeting tomorrow? Yeah, okay, all right.
So, Jim and Vishal, you want to talk a little bit about the next series in December? Is that correct?
Yeah, want me to go?
Okay.
You know, believe it or not, the talks all started back in June in Texas. There's this trade show called the Design Automation Conference that was in Austin, and we had this panel discussion. And I have this panel discussion in the middle of the show, the commercial show, and I thought, well, what would be interesting is to assemble some of my colleagues and do it on cognitive neural nets. You know, neural nets are the thing that drive a lot of the solvers for artificial intelligence, right? So a few of these guys were there. Reich was there, James was there, and Chris was there. And so it was one of these things where we had standing room only and no one left for about 90 minutes, which is really unusual. That, believe me, they weren't there to see me. You know, it was a topic. So we're going to redo this thing, except we're going to add, you know, Drew, sitting right there, Mr. Drew, and James, our favorite civil libertarian, right? And we're going to talk for, 60 minutes or so, and then have some questions about how we're implementing and the things you got to look for and the things that give you some trouble. Now, this is going to be kind of a hardware-ish discussion. This is going to be pretty technical, but it's different than tonight. Tonight was trying to, show that we actually do have empathy for the society and culture, and I think Vishal did a great job. But I would invite you to come to that. It was a really good discussion back in June, and Ad and Drew will make it that much better. And so I would invite you to do that on December 4th, which I think is a Thursday, right here, similar format, and appreciate if you do that. We'll get a lot of, we'll use social media to tell people that we're doing this and get some more advertising out there, right? So hopefully you're enjoying this series and finding some value in it. After the first of the year, we'll plan about 3 or 4 more of these. We'll get more of the San Jose State University faculty involved as we sort of define what cognitive science means for San Jose State University in particular. I want to do one on power, one that talks about how we don't use a lot of energy in trying to do these things, and probably one on security. Maybe something else, but at least those are the ones we're talking about right now for next year.
December 4th is a Monday.
It's a Monday.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming out tonight. Please mark your calendars for December 4th, a Monday.
Yeah.
For Vishal Kapoor and Jim Hogan, my name is Sean O'Kane. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.